In the autumn of 1886, a surveyor working for the fledgling United States Geological Survey made a discovery in the tangled forests of western North Carolina that would remain buried in official records for over a century. His name was Elias Ward, and he was mapping the remote ridges of what is now the Pisgah National Forest when he stumbled upon a clearing where no clearing should exist, a perfect rectangle of land, approximately 100 feet by 150 feet, where the trees refused to grow. The soil was dark, almost black, and in its center stood a single stone chimney, its mortar crumbling, its hearth cold. Ward recorded the anomaly in his field notes with the casual precision of a scientist, encountered what appears to be an abandoned homestead site. No structures remain save the chimney. Curious that the trees have not reclaimed this plot. Locals refuse to discuss the matter. Those last 4 words would haunt Ward for the remainder of his life. Because when he asked the mountain people about the clearing, they did not simply refuse to answer. They fell silent. They turned away. One old woman, her hands gnarled from a lifetime of working the stubborn Appalachian soil, made the sign of the cross and whispered something in a dialect so thick Ward could barely parse it: "Them that knows don't tell, and them that tells don't stay." Elias Ward's field notes were filed away in the USGS archives in Washington, D.C., where they gathered dust for generations. But the mystery he had stumbled upon did not end with his silence. It had begun nearly 40 years earlier, in the chaos following the Civil War, when the mountains of western North Carolina became a refuge for the desperate, the hunted, and the forgotten. The year is 1868. The war is over, but in the mountains, peace is a luxury no one can afford. The Appalachian Range that cuts through North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia had always been a place apart, a labyrinth of hollows and ridges where the law was a distant rumor and survival was the only currency that mattered. For centuries, the mountain people had kept to themselves, intermarrying, developing their own dialects, their own customs, their own strange and beautiful ways of understanding the world. They planted by the moon signs, believed in haints and witches, and knew the forest as intimately as they knew their own families. They were fiercely independent, deeply suspicious of outsiders, and possessed of a collective memory that stretched back to the first Scotch-Irish and German settlers who had pushed into the wilderness generations before. To them, the lowlanders, the government men, the railroad agents, the speculators, were a species of predator to be avoided at all costs. When the war came, the mountains did not choose sides in the way the rest of the nation did. Some men fought for the Confederacy, others, equally numerous, fought for the Union. Many fought for neither, taking to the forests to escape conscription altogether. The region became a no-man's land, a place where deserters from both armies hid in caves and hollow trees, where feuds that had simmered for decades were inflamed by wartime violence, and where the wounded and dying from the great battles far to the east and north filtered back home to die in their own beds, if they were lucky enough to have a bed to die in. It was into this world that a young woman named Sarah Bethune stepped, alone and carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and a secret that would eventually consume her. Sarah was a schoolteacher, or at least she had been before the war. Born in the small town of Asheville, she had been educated at a modest female academy where she learned reading, writing, arithmetic, and, crucially, the art of keeping a journal. Her handwriting was elegant, her prose precise, and her observations acute. She had come to the mountains to take up a teaching position in a one-room schoolhouse near the headwaters of the French Broad River, a place called Cold Springs Hollow. The position had been offered to her by a man named Josiah Cutter, the local justice of the peace and the unofficial patriarch of the Hollow. Cutter was a large, bearish man with a heavy beard and eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He had a reputation for fairness, for settling disputes with a firm hand and a calm voice. But he also had a reputation for something else, a secrecy so profound that even his neighbors, the people who had lived beside him for decades, admitted they knew little about his past. Sarah arrived in Cold Springs Hollow on a cool October morning, her boots caked with red mud, her dress stained from a journey that had taken her through some of the most rugged terrain in America. The Hollow was a small community, perhaps 20 families scattered along the banks of a creek that glittered like black glass in the autumn light. The schoolhouse was a modest log structure with a dirt floor and a wood-burning stove that filled the room with a comforting, smoky warmth. It had been abandoned during the war, and Sarah spent her first weeks cleaning, repairing, and preparing for the handful of children who would come to learn their letters and their sums. From the beginning, there was something about Cold Springs Hollow that unsettled her. It was not the isolation, or the hard-scrabble lives of the people, or the knowledge that this was a place where old wounds festered and old crimes went unpunished. It was something more specific, more tangible. It was the way the locals spoke of the forest that surrounded them. They called it the Beckoning Wood. Sarah first heard the name from a young girl named Mary, one of her students. Mary was a shy, thin child with a perpetual cough and eyes that seemed too large for her face. One afternoon, as the children were leaving for the day, Mary lingered behind, clutching her slate to her chest. "Miss Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't never go into the Beckoning Wood." Sarah looked up from her desk, her pen pausing mid-stroke. "The what, child?" "The Beckoning Wood. It's what we call the woods on the other side of the ridge, past the Cutter place. There's a clearing there, a place where the trees don't grow. Some say it's cursed. Some say it's haunted. Some say there's things living there that ain't human." Sarah smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. "I'm sure it's just an old legend, Mary. Every place has its stories." Mary shook her head, her eyes wide. "It ain't a legend, Miss Sarah. It's true. My grandpap, he went in there once, when he was a boy. He got lost, wandered for a whole day. When he come out, he wouldn't never talk about what he seen. Not once. And he wouldn't never go back. He said the wood, it calls to you. It whispers your name. And if you answer." She stopped, her face pale. Sarah waited, but Mary would not continue. She turned and fled from the schoolhouse, leaving Sarah alone with a prickle of unease that she could not quite shake. That night, Sarah wrote in her journal, "There is something strange about this place. The people are kind, but guarded. They speak in riddles. And there is a forest, the Beckoning Wood, which they regard with a mixture of fear and reverence that borders on the superstitious. I wonder what they are hiding. I wonder if the war left deeper scars here than I imagined." She would not have long to wonder. The days passed, and Sarah settled into the rhythm of mountain life. She taught the children their lessons, visited the families, and slowly began to earn their trust. She learned that Cold Springs Hollow had been a Unionist stronghold during the war, a haven for deserters and draft evaders. She learned that Josiah Cutter had been a leader among them, a man who had organized a network of hiding places and escape routes that had saved dozens of lives. She also learned that Cutter's wife, a quiet, sad-eyed woman named Mariah, had died in the final years of the war, under circumstances that no one would discuss. The deeper Sarah dug, the more she realized that the mountain people were hiding something not just from her, but from themselves. There were gaps in their stories, omissions that spoke louder than words. When she asked about the war, they spoke of battles and bloodshed, but they never spoke of what they had seen, what they had done. When she asked about the forest, they grew silent, their faces closing like shuttered windows. And then, one evening in late November, Sarah made a discovery that would change everything. She had been visiting a family on the far side of the hollow, a family named Polk. The Polks were a large, boisterous clan, and Sarah had enjoyed their company immensely. But as she was leaving, she noticed a small, leather-bound book on a shelf in the corner of the cabin. It was old, its covers worn and cracked, its pages yellowed with age. She picked it up, more out of curiosity than anything else, and opened it. What she found inside made her breath catch. The book was a journal, written in a clear, elegant hand. The first entry was dated 1842. The author was a woman named Eliza Cutter, Josiah Cutter's mother. Sarah read the first few pages, her heart pounding. The journal was a record of Eliza's life, a chronicle of her struggles, her joys, her deepest secrets. But as Sarah read further, she realized that the journal contained something far more valuable, a history of the hollow, a history of the people, a history that had been deliberately erased. Sarah asked the Polks if she could borrow the book. They hesitated, exchanging glances, but eventually relented. Sarah promised to return it the next day, and she hurried back to her cabin, her mind racing. That night, she read the journal from cover to cover. It was a revelation. Eliza Cutter wrote with a poet's eye and a philosopher's mind. She described the forest in terms that were almost mystical, seeing it as a living entity, a presence that could be felt but not seen. She wrote of the beckoning wood, and of a clearing within it, a place that was forbidden to the settlers. She claimed that the Cherokee, who had lived in the region for centuries before the whites arrived, had called the place Tsalagi Anada, the place of the whisperers. They believed that the forest was inhabited by spirits, ancient and powerful, who could be both helpful and destructive, depending on how they were approached. But as Sarah read on, she discovered something far darker. In 1845, a group of settlers had ventured into the beckoning wood in search of a missing girl. They had found the girl, or what was left of her, naked, her body covered in strange symbols carved into her skin. They had also found a single item, a piece of tarnished silver jewelry, which Eliza Cutter had recognized as belonging to her own mother. Eliza wrote that her mother had disappeared years earlier, in circumstances that had never been explained. Sarah set the journal down, her hands shaking. She felt a cold dread creeping into her bones. She had come to the mountains seeking a fresh start, a chance to rebuild her life after the devastation of the war. Instead, she had stumbled into a story that seemed to have no ending, a mystery that stretched back decades, perhaps even centuries. She thought of Mary's warning, "The wood whispers your name," and of the old woman's words, "Them that knows don't tell, and them that tells don't stay." She realized, with a growing sense of horror, that she was no longer just an observer. She was becoming a part of the story. The following day, Sarah returned the journal to the Polks and asked them directly about the clearing. They refused to speak, claiming they knew nothing. But Sarah saw it in their faces, a flicker of recognition, of fear, of guilt. She knew then that she was on the right track. She began to investigate systematically. She interviewed the oldest residents of the hollow, coaxing fragments of stories from them, piece by piece. She searched the abandoned cabins that dotted the mountainsides, looking for clues. She even ventured into the beckoning wood herself, crossing the ridge and descending into the dark, tangled forest. She found the clearing exactly where Elias Ward would describe it 40 years later. It was a perfect rectangle, the trees refusing to encroach, the soil dark and fertile. In its center stood a single stone chimney, identical to the one Ward would later document. And on the ground, half buried in leaves, she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a child's shoe. Small, worn, and stained with dark, rusty patches that could only be blood. Sarah stood in the clearing, the weight of the forest pressing in on her from all sides. She could feel the silence, thick and suffocating, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. And then, she heard it. A whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was her name. Sarah. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. There was no one there. The forest was empty, the trees standing like silent sentinels. But the whisper came again. Closer this time. Sarah. She fled, running through the forest as if the hounds of hell were at her heels. She did not stop until she reached the safety of her cabin, her lungs burning, her legs trembling. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I do not know what I saw, or what I heard. But I know that there is something in the beckoning wood. Something ancient, something evil, something that is still hungry." Sarah's investigation would lead her down a dark and winding path, one that would eventually cost her everything she held dear. She discovered that the clearing was not a natural phenomenon, it was man-made, a site of ritual and sacrifice. The settlers had brought with them from the old world a legacy of fear and superstition, a belief in witches and devils and the power of blood. They had found in the Appalachian forest a place where they could practice their dark arts in secret, away from the judgment of the church and the law. The beckoning wood, Sarah learned, was not a place to be explored. It was a place to be avoided at all costs. The mountain people had known this for generations, and they had kept its secrets hidden from the outside world. But Sarah's investigation threatened to reveal those secrets, to expose the dark heart of the hollow to the light of day. And that was something that could not be allowed. The threats began soon after. A warning left on her doorstep, a crude doll, its face twisted into a grotesque sneer, with a note pinned to its chest, "Stop asking questions." A horse's head, its eyes gouged out, left in her classroom. A fire in the night, a sparking ember that nearly consumed her cabin. Sarah did not stop. She could not. The story was too big, too powerful, too important to let go. She was no longer just a schoolteacher, she was a historian, a detective, a seeker of truth. She had found the thread, and she was determined to unravel the entire tapestry. But the darkness that had been hiding in the hollow for generations was about to claim another victim. In the spring of 1869, Sarah Bethune disappeared. The search for her was brief and inconclusive. Her cabin was found empty, her belongings undisturbed. Her journal, however, was gone, presumably taken by Sarah herself, or by those who wanted to suppress its contents. The mountain people closed ranks, claiming they knew nothing. Josiah Cutter, the justice of the peace, declared that Sarah had simply moved on, as many before her had done. But the old woman who had told Elias Ward that "them that knows don't tell" knew better. She had seen the shadows moving in the forest. She had heard the whispers in the wind. She knew that Sarah Bethune had found what she was looking for. And she knew that the beckoning wood had claimed another soul. For decades, the story of Sarah Bethune faded from memory. The mountain people continued to avoid the clearing, and the forest slowly began to reclaim the hollow. The schoolhouse fell into ruin, the cabins rotted away, and the families scattered, seeking better lives elsewhere. By the time Elias Ward stumbled upon the clearing in 1886, Cold Springs Hollow was a ghost town, a place that existed only in the fading memories of the old-timers who had once called it home. But the story did not end there. In 1902, a team of surveyors working for the Southern Railway discovered a large, wooden chest buried near the site of the old schoolhouse. Inside were dozens of journals, letters, and other documents, many of them written by Sarah Bethune. The chest had been sealed with wax and buried deep beneath the roots of an ancient oak, as if someone had wanted to ensure that it would never be found. The surveyors turned the chest over to the local authorities, who eventually transferred it to the State Archives in Raleigh. There, the documents sat for more than a century, gathering dust in a dim, forgotten corner of the archives. They were catalogued, filed, and then forgotten until a young historian named William Caldwell stumbled across them in 2008. Caldwell was researching the post-Civil War history of Western North Carolina when he came across a reference to an unidentified collection in the archives. Intrigued, he requested the materials, and was given access to a single box containing a trove of documents, all of them related to a place called Cold Springs Hollow. What he found changed his life. William Caldwell spent the next decade of his life piecing together the story of Sarah Bethune and the beckoning wood. He read her journals, carefully and meticulously, tracking her movements, her thoughts, her fears. He traced the history of the hollow, the families who had lived there, the secrets they had kept. He identified Josiah Cutter and his mother Eliza, and he confirmed many of the details that Sarah had written about. But it was not until he uncovered a series of photographs, taken in the 1890s by an itinerant photographer who had wandered through the mountains, that Caldwell truly understood the depth of the darkness that had consumed Cold Springs Hollow. The photographs were of the clearing. They showed the same stone chimney, the same dark soil, the same forbidding forest. But they also showed something else, something that the photographer had not intended to capture. In the foreground of one photograph, barely visible in the shadows, was the figure of a woman. She was naked, her body covered in strange symbols, her hair wild and unkempt. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth open as if she was screaming. Caldwell knew, instantly, that he was looking at Sarah Bethune. He also knew that he was looking at a crime scene. William Caldwell's investigation would reveal a conspiracy of silence that had stretched for more than a century. The mountain people, he concluded, had been complicit in Sarah's disappearance, not because they had committed the crime, but because they had allowed it to happen. They had known the secrets of the beckoning wood, and they had done nothing to stop them. Caldwell's findings, published in a small academic journal, caused a sensation. Historians, journalists, and amateur sleuths descended on the region, eager to uncover the truth. But the truth, it turned out, was more elusive than anyone could have imagined. Sarah Bethune's body was never found. The clearing, when it was eventually examined by archaeologists, yielded no trace of her, no bones, no clothing, no belongings. The photographs, which Caldwell had been so certain were genuine, were found to be fakes, clever forgeries created by an anonymous hoaxer who had used Caldwell's own research to craft a plausible narrative. But the clearing was real. The chimney was real. The journals were real. And the story of Sarah Bethune, whether or not she ever existed, had become a part of the Appalachian legend, a tale of fear and courage, of secrets and lies, of a woman who had dared to speak truth to power and had paid the ultimate price. In 1977, a young couple hiking through the Pisgah National Forest stumbled upon a clearing in the woods. They found a chimney, just as Elias Ward had described it. And they found something else, a small leather journal, weathered and water-stained, half buried in the leaves. The journal was Sarah Bethune's. It contained a final entry, dated the day she had disappeared. "I know now what I must do," she had written. "The beckoning wood is called to me, and I must answer. I do not know what I will find there, but I know that I cannot live with the question unanswered. I cannot be silent. I cannot be afraid. For if the darkness can be defeated by anything, it is by the courage of a single soul who refuses to be silenced." Those were her last words. The journal was returned to the state archives, where it remains today, along with a letter that Sarah had written to Josiah Cutter, confessing what she had discovered about his mother and the dark history of Cold Springs Hollow. But there is a mystery surrounding the letter. It was found in the same journal that Sarah had written on the day she disappeared. And yet, experts have concluded that the handwriting in the letter is not Sarah's. It is someone else's. The letter is dated 1870, the year after Sarah vanished. It was written by someone who knew her, someone who had access to her journal, someone who was trying to finish the story she had begun. But who? And why? The Beckoning Wood still stands today, a place of quiet, somber beauty that draws hikers and nature lovers from all over the world. But those who know its history approach it with caution, their eyes scanning the shadows, their ears straining for the sound of a whisper on the wind. Some say that on quiet nights, when the moon is full, you can hear a woman's voice calling out from the depths of the wood. It is a soft, gentle voice, the voice of a schoolteacher calling her children home. But it is also a voice of sorrow, a voice that has been calling for more than a century, searching for someone to hear it. Others say that the clearing is a portal, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, a place where the dead can speak to the living. They say that if you stand in the center of the clearing and listen carefully, you can hear the echoes of a long-forgotten tragedy, a tale of murder and betrayal that has never been fully told. And still others say that there is nothing supernatural about the Beckoning Wood at all, that the real mystery is the one we have created for ourselves, a story that we have woven around a simple, tragic event, a story that has become a part of our collective consciousness, a story that we tell ourselves to make sense of the darkness that lurks in every human heart. Today, the journals of Sarah Bethune, the letters of Eliza Cutter, and the documents compiled by William Caldwell all reside in the North Carolina State Archives, carefully preserved and catalogued. They are available to any researcher willing to make the journey to Raleigh and spend hours poring over the faded, yellowed pages. But there is a puzzle at the heart of this story that has never been solved. The letter written in 1870, the letter that was found in Sarah's journal, the letter that experts say was written by someone else, it contains a confession. It tells the story of a crime, a murder that had been covered up for decades. But the person who wrote it is never named. And the crime it describes is never fully explained. Some believe that the letter is a forgery, a deliberate attempt to mislead. Others believe that it is the key to the entire mystery, a final, desperate attempt by someone to tell the truth before it was too late. Still others believe that Sarah Bethune never existed at all, that she was a fictional creation, a composite of several different women who lived in the hollow during the war, a symbol of the fear and uncertainty that gripped the region after the fall of the Confederacy. We will never know for certain. The Beckoning Wood does not give up its secrets easily. The mountain people, with their deep traditions of secrecy and self-reliance, have kept the truth locked in their hearts for generations. And perhaps the truth is too painful to bear. Perhaps it is better to leave the story unfinished, to let the mysteries remain mysteries, to acknowledge that there are some questions that can never be answered, some wounds that can never be healed. But there is one more detail, one final piece of the puzzle that might change everything. In 1965, a letter was discovered in the attic of an old house in the town of Brevard, North Carolina. It was written in 1886, the same year that Elias Ward made his discovery in the forest. The letter was addressed to a local newspaper editor, and it described, in chilling detail, the events that had taken place in Cold Springs Hollow. The letter was signed "A Friend of the Truth," and it contained a story that was so shocking, so disturbing, that the editor refused to publish it. The letter languished in the newspaper's archives for decades, until a curious archivist stumbled across it in the 1990s. The letter claimed that the clearing in the Beckoning Wood was not a site of ritual sacrifice, as Sarah Bethune had suspected. It was a burial ground, a place where the people of Cold Springs Hollow had buried their dead for generations. But the dead were not ordinary people. They were victims of a disease that had swept through the hollow in the 1830s, a disease that had left its survivors with a strange and terrifying affliction. The letter claimed that the disease was a kind of madness, a madness that caused its victims to hear voices, to see things that were not there, to whisper secrets to the trees. The people of Cold Springs Hollow had called it the beckoning, a sickness of the soul that drew its victims ever deeper into the forest, until they disappeared entirely. The letter also claimed that the disease was not natural. It had been brought to the hollow by a stranger, a man who had arrived in the 1820s and who had vanished without a trace. The man had carried with him a secret that had transformed the hollow into a place of fear and shadow. The letter was the work of a crank, a madman, a person whose mind had been warped by years of isolation and despair. And yet, there was something about it that rang true. The details were too specific, too precise, too consistent with the stories that Sarah Bethune had recorded in her journal. Could it be that the disease was real? Could it be that the Beckoning Wood was not a place of ancient spirits and dark rituals, but a place of sickness and death, a place where the madness that had consumed the hollow had been allowed to fester and grow? The answer, like the answer to the mystery of Sarah Bethune, remains elusive. The letter is now stored in the same archives as the journals and photographs, a silent testament to the enduring power of the Appalachian legend. The clearing in the Beckoning Wood is not a place of historical significance. It has never been designated a landmark, never been protected by law. It is simply a piece of land, a forgotten corner of the forest, a place where the trees refuse to grow. But for the people of Western North Carolina, it is a place of living memory. They may not speak of it, they may not write about it, but they know it is there, and they know that it matters. They know the stories of the schoolteacher, the justice of the peace, the mysterious disease, the whispered secrets. They know that the Beckoning Wood is a place where the boundaries between reality and myth are thin, a place where the dead can reach out and touch the living. They know that the Beckoning Wood is still calling. The story of Sarah Bethune and the Beckoning Wood is not a story that can be neatly resolved. It is not a story with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It is a story that exists in the spaces between the words, in the gaps in the official records, in the silence of the mountain people. It is a story that we have been telling ourselves for more than a century, and it is a story that we will continue to tell for generations to come. For the Beckoning Wood is not just a place. It is a symbol. It represents all the darkness that we cannot explain, all the secrets we cannot share, all the fears that we carry in our hearts. It is the ghost that haunts the American landscape, the reminder that history is not always written on stone tablets and official documents. It is written in the whispers of the wind, the rustle of the leaves, the shadows that move between the trees. It is written in the eyes of the mountain people, who will tell you, if you ask them, be careful what you seek. You just might find it. And so the story ends as it began, with a mystery. A clearing in the forest. A single stone chimney. A silence that speaks volumes. The truth is out there, buried in the archives, waiting for someone with the courage to uncover it. But are we ready for that truth? Are we prepared to confront the darkness that lies at the heart of the Appalachian legend? Perhaps not. Perhaps it is better to leave the story unfinished, to let the mysteries remain mysteries, to acknowledge that there are some things that we are not meant to know. But the Beckoning Wood will always be there, waiting. And it will always be calling. One question lingers, unanswered, as the camera fades to black and the credits roll. The letter found in 1965 claimed the beckoning was a disease of the soul brought by a stranger. Sarah Bethune's final journal entry suggests she went into the forest willingly, to confront the darkness. The photographs, the documents, all of it points to a crime, a tragedy, a great and terrible wrong that was covered up for so long that the truth may now be lost to history. But what if it isn't lost? What if the answer is still out there, waiting to be found? What if the beckoning wood is still calling, and we are simply too afraid to answer? Who is the stranger who came to Cold Springs Hollow? Why did the mountain people keep his secret? And what exactly happened to Sarah Bethune? We may never know. The forest keeps its secrets well.